everyone's been talking, we've touched on a few things of what's working, what's not working, and so now we're going to dive into that a little bit further and talk about, in the current election system, what's working, what needs to be fixed, how can it be fixed, and why. So this time I'm going to start right next to you, Jim.
Last fall, we engaged on something that has never been done before in the history of our 125 years history. We had a rather significant outreach effort, and we called it Voter Engagement 2012. We were looking ahead to this year, and we were also looking at very disturbing trends that we were already identifying over the last several years. And I mentioned them earlier about younger voters falling off the voting rolls and not keeping their registrations current. But also, to make reference to the topic that was just discussed, general feeling of disenfranchisement by people who fear that their democracy is being bought and sold as a result of the Citizens United case. That case has been cited over and over again by voters, sometimes indirectly. They feel inundated by robocalls that are financed with this money. They're very upset with the attempts to poison the well and to steer the conversations away from issues in very destructive campaigns that are focused on really side issues and personalities and everything like that. So there are consequences that you may not realize with decisions like Citizens United. And one of those is that there's just this general perception, whether it's right or wrong, that the individual is losing control, the individuals as a group are losing control of their elections, and that it's being overrun by soulless, faceless corporations. And that's not to speak against corporations. I happen to be one, so I'm not against corporations, but I'm saying that we don't register corporations to vote at the Chicago Election Board or anywhere else in the United States. They don't have individual rights to bear arms. They are not individuals. The Constitution speaks where it does speak, and it is silent, as another person mentioned, on the whole right as a voter. That is something that's evolved through amendments like the 16th Amendment, and it refers to electors. And sometimes in state laws, the electors are then further defined as people who are 18 years of age, U.S. citizens, and eligible to vote. So we had this outreach, and the biggest area where people felt concern was that they thought that the opportunities to grow the franchise and to grow participation included the possibility of same-day registration and opportunities such as, this may sound extreme and we're not ready, I don't believe technologically we're ready for a secure system, but they wanted more online and the possibility of phone voting, which is occurring in other governments around the world. Again, the Pentagon has studied that, we've studied it, and we're not convinced that the security is there for online registration, or online voting rather, because sooner or later your ballot is going to be going through somebody else's server. And the possibility of it being tampered with, the possibility of it being opened and examined are just too great right now to offer some kind of assurance that we can have a secure ballot where your choices remain your choices and known only to you. But we did hear that we wanted more from the various community groups and business groups from across the city of Chicago, that they did want at least some improvements in portals, and we did adapt one this year. It's an online ballot marking system. Again, it's just where you mark it for military and overseas voters. And that's where they receive the ballot and they are able to mark it online and then print it out and return it, as opposed to waiting for an absentee ballot to arrive through the mail. And then they're able to print it out, they're able to assign a certification just like you and I would with our absentee ballot and return that. by mail. So it's not an online voting system, but it is an online ability to access the ballot rather instantly and mark it on your screen, much like you see a touch screen. And if you make a mistake, you can go back and if you make a mistake on a paper ballot that's sent to you over in Afghanistan, you don't have an ability to undo that mistake real easily. But if you make a mistake on this marking system, you can go back, log in again. You don't get to vote again, but you can go back and print out a different version of your ballot. So, as I mentioned before, we believe that we ought to explore online registration, which they have in Indiana, which is considered one of the more conservative states. They have in Arizona, which is one of the more conservative states. They link it together with your state identification or your driver's license number. But it's purely online. There is no signature. You just show up at the polls on election day. And if that's the way you register, you would have to show identification when you went to vote to confirm you are who you are. And those are some of the things that we're looking for in terms of, and we're looking at rather, in terms of growing the franchise.
I'm not sure, but I may be one of, or maybe just in a minority of people who've actually run for election at this table. Have you run for election? No? Okay. Have you run for election ever? No? Okay.
No comment.
Oh, no comment. Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, I've had real experience in elections, so my remarks are going to really be informed by that. Just a couple of responses here is, in the state of Florida, one of the reasons that election, when Gore was supposed to have lost, is that there were a whole lot of people in jail who were disenfranchised and unable to vote. So I'm not sure what our rules are in Illinois. But certainly, if we're going to look at fairness in elections, and what I would refer to as one man, one vote, which is our principle in this country, corporations don't count. That ain't one man with one vote. So I really respect your opinions here, your responses. The other thing is, I actually told my husband, and he paused when I said it, but if there isn't a green on the ballot to run for president this term, and if Ron Paul were nominated, I think I would vote for him, because he would end the war. And it makes sense to me, $1 billion a week could be spent in this country, in the community of Englewood where I work, where it has the highest demolition of buildings right now of any neighborhood in the city. And I could talk for a long time about that. But then also, another concern I have is you must not have a lot of faith in advertising, because, and I'm not sure why you don't, because there's a whole lot of money spent on advertising to convince people to buy lousy food and buy things they don't need. And so if the purpose of this corporate personhood is to advertise for candidates, I think they would be smart enough to not do it if they didn't think it worked. So I think it works. We've noticed that it works. So now, just in answering the question, our current system, what's working, etc. We're independents, Green Party people. We don't have any money. Yeah, I've described that already. We're your next door neighbor, you might say. The corporate parties have a lot of money. I'll give an example. Mike Madigan, because of the result of what was a campaign finance reform effort a couple of years ago in the state of Illinois, that said that certain individuals couldn't give over a certain amount of money. I'm not remembering how much it is. But you could give all the money you want to Mike Madigan, in other words, the Democratic Party. So some huge big corporation can come in and give Mike all the money they want to give him, and Mike is the one who decides who gets that money. So we really have one-man rule in the state of Illinois. You know, it used to be Daly Country, now I think it's just Madigan Country / maybe Emmanuel, I'm not sure. But at this point, we really have Mike Madigan deciding who gets the money and who gets elected, and of course what they're going to vote on when they're in the legislature. So it was actually my senator, Don Harmon, that sponsored this, and he boasts very much about how wonderful this campaign finance reform. Ain't no reform in my mind. The other thing is independents, as I've said before, have jobs and families, so we don't have the resources to hire people to go door to door in elections, or to sit for hours, weeks, and months in the Board of Elections, thank you very much, when the Democrats challenge our petitions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In the Whitney campaign, because we were a new party, we required 25,000 signatures to get Mr. Whitney on the ballot. In addition, in order to ensure that those signatures, when they were challenged, we'd have enough to actually get Mr. Whitney on the ballot, we collected 39,000 signatures to get him on the ballot. Well, the Democrats decided that they really didn't want Mr. Whitney on the ballot, so they said that 20,000 of those signatures were either forged or people didn't live at the addresses they said they lived in. So what that meant then is that we just spent the next 3 months, 5 days a week, from 9 to 4, in front of computer screens with a hired attorney over here and one of us regular people over here sitting in front of a screen, taking time off from work, leaving our families with babysitters, missing meals to sit, because if you weren't there when they were going through all of these signatures, they got through, okay? Because there was nobody there to say, no, that's wrong, that's actually me, when they challenged it. Or in many cases, that's actually my state representative. He believed in democracy. He signed my petition, okay? So they challenged signatures that were obviously not forged, and obviously they lived in that address. So that took us 3 months to do that. We kept ourselves on the ballot. And again, that's an example of what it takes to be an independent running in this so-called democracy. So here's another example. In the last election, Laurel Lambert-Schmidt ran for the 3rd Congressional District. She won in the prior election, she had won 5%. That's enough to make her an official party. By the way, when I ran, I got 30%. So in my district, we were an official party in the 7th representative district. But in Laurel's case, in the 3rd district, she got 5%. That made the Green Party an official party. So that meant she only needed 600 signatures to get on the ballot for the next election. However, if you notice, we had a redistricting. There was a census count, and we redistricted. And so, my gosh, you know what that meant? That Laura wasn't in that district anymore. She lived in the same place. It's essentially, there's still a 3rd district, but they determined that Laura wasn't in that district anymore. So they demanded that she needed 5,000 signatures. Of course, that's when she had already gone and collected 600. So we went to the Board of Elections in Springfield. We actually occupied the Board of Elections. It was kind of fun to watch what went on down there. And that's a state board of elections. It's different than you. And we had some really interesting conversations. It was kind of fun, I have to admit. But in addition to that, since we were challenged, we lost our court. We went to court. We lost that. We appealed it with the Supreme Court. And then when we went to the Board of Elections, we were told that they were not going to accept our petitions that we put on the table for them. Even though we had gotten the petitions, and under the law, the way we understood it, they refused to accept our petitions. Is this a democracy? I don't think so. So here's a few more things, is that judges, you know the judges that made the decision in Laurel's case? Well, they run on a partisan ticket. I was unable to vote for judges in the last election because I'm a Green Party member. I had to be a Democrat or a Republican in order to get a ballot to vote for judges. Is that a democracy? Well, then I would say the same judges that made a determination on the party, on whether or not we were going to get on the ballot, are those judges who ran on the Democratic ballot. So most of the judges that we've gone before are Democrats. Do you think they're going to see in favor of the Greens? I mean, realistically, is that ever going to happen? So this is kind of, they're holding to the Democrats. They're going to see in their favor. Actually, met a judge campaigning on the street, and I appealed to him, you know, please go and demand. And actually, you're here, and I'm going to demand from you. What we really need is a separate ballot to vote for judges. If this is a democracy, I ought to be allowed to vote for the people who are going to determine my case in court. So the last thing is that rules are routinely changed. So following the Whitney campaign, which I've described somewhat, they shortened the petitioning period, they being the Democrats in the legislature, because they have all the power to make the rules. Okay, one more second. And then so it makes it hard to recruit volunteers because they run into the cold season, they change the season, and people who really sit at the table when you go to get elected, the election judge is there. In order to have a green election judge in an election, you have to have come in first or second in 3 successive gubernatorial races. So, if we had come in first or second, it would have been 12 years before we get judges on the table. This is not the way that democracy ought to work. We need to do something about it.
Well, the question is our current electoral election system, is working basically? And I'd say it's working fine. I think it's working really well. It's working very well for like 0.1%, not even 1% necessarily, 0.1% of the population that gets richer and richer, right? So for the people who run the country, right, for that one-party state that we have, as Corbett says, the party of property, is working quite well. Now, for the rest of us, it's not working so well. We just heard the horrific stories from our friend from the Green Party, and I would say that's a reform we need. Forget about all this nonsense about you need so many signatures from people on Tuesday who are left-handed and haven't moved anywhere in 3 months and so on. I think ballot access is a basic democratic right, and I think it should be made as simple as possible. Obviously, you don't want 2,000 people on the ballot, but on the other hand, I'm not as anti-American as most so-called pro-American politicians. They claim that, unlike, say, the Netherlands, the Dutch, or the French, or even the British, our cousins supposedly, Americans are too stupid to figure out who they want to vote for, so we have to protect them from ballot clutter. Therefore, we have to have all these regulations to keep parties off the ballot. I say let the Libertarians run, let the Constitutional Party run, even though it's against my interest. I'm even for the Prohibitionist Party to be allowed back on the ballot. I believe that's a basic democratic right to have ballot access, and that's one of the things you'd have to change. Along with that, it doesn't do any good to have ballot access. Nobody knows who you are. There is such things as public television, there's C-SPAN. I think that everyone should get a certain amount of free public television time. No one's going to be forced to watch it for our libertarian friends. If you don't want to watch the Socialist Party guy talking on C-SPAN Channel 4, you don't have to. But at least it would be there. At least they would get free television time. Where do I get these crazy ideas from? Most everything I mentioned is exactly how most of the representative democracies in Western Europe, that are, by the way, capitals, not so, but that's the way they run. And I know politics is different over there, but I don't think the people there are any smarter than our people are.
Yes, okay, I'm gonna bring us down to Erica.
Yes, I wouldn't be forced to watch it, but I would be forced to pay for it. The free television time is going to be paid for by something. It's going to be paid for by tax dollars that are going to come from people, me being one of them. To address one thing before getting to a couple of points that I do agree with some of our panelists on the other end of the table on. Our friend from the Green Party said, I don't have much faith in advertising dollars. It's not quite the point I was making. I have more faith in people to be a little bit more discerning about it. The idea that people are going to be compelled into buying quote-unquote things they don't need. I don't presume to know what the people sitting in this audience believe they need. I don't think you would presume to know what I believe I need. So I'm all for as much speech as possible to let people inform themselves, to let them determine for themselves what they want. I believe people are discerning enough to be able to make choices that they believe are appropriate for them. And I think that's an end worth pursuing. Two things I do agree on. The system for ballot access, particularly here in the state of Illinois, is asinine if you've ever been engaged in it. You're pretty much guaranteed, no matter where you're running and what party you're running on, you're going to have your petitions challenged by somebody who doesn't want you on the ballot. Interestingly enough, not far from here, it was State Senator Alice Palmer, who had originally opted to run for Congress, chose not to, decided to run for re-election to her Senate seat, had her petitions challenged by a challenger in that election. She was thrown off the ballot. That challenger went on to become the state senator from Hyde Park here, Barack Obama. Same process engaged in by, everyone here in Illinois. I would hesitate to use the word right, because I think that's a word that's bandied around a little bit too much and carelessly. But absolutely here in Illinois, we need to change the structure of having to gather petitions and having the challenge system that we do. The other one is something else our Green Party friend alluded to, the redistricting process. Of course, it's highly political and slanted towards the Democrats' advantage here in Illinois. Say you go down to Texas, it's highly slanted in advantage in favor of Republicans. The way technology exists now, the way we know about population, and the way the computer technology that exists now, it is incomprehensible to me that we do not have more sane districts being drawn ostensibly by computers that can group districts together, not drawn to look like Picasso art the way they are, particularly here in the city of Chicago, to make sure that this little enclave of people, we know how they're going to vote is in my district and not in yours. One of the reform I forgot to touch on last time around as well. As I said, I'm not in favor of senators being democratically elected. I am, however, in favor of greatly increasing the number of representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think the Founding Fathers would absolutely be aghast at the idea that one person, one congressman here in Chicago, representing the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that they do. I've been represented by, I think, 4 different Congress critters over my lifetime. I'm involved in politics. I've never met a single one of them. And the advantage, I think, of having as much government driven down to the local level is Danny Davis, who's currently my congressman, doesn't have to look me in the eye before he casts a vote to raise my taxes or to engage in this spending program or that spending program. He doesn't have to look me in the eye. However, my alderman, I have met. He does have to look me in the eye before voting in city council. We can argue whether or not that it's working right. But that personal influence exists on a far more local level when they're representing fewer people. I think absolutely it's insane to have one congressman representing the thousands upon thousands that they currently do. We should have more people in the U.S. House.
I think I want to return to Erica's argument for federalism, and I think there are some virtues of federalism, but one of its non-virtues is state control over the voting process. It seems to me literally absurd to elect a president of the United States under at least 50, probably more than that, different ballot access rules, different voter registration rules, different ways to register, different procedures in regard to early voting, the absurdity of the primary system. I mean, I'm a political scientist and I'm supposed to teach that stuff, and I usually skip it over it because I can't really understand the difference between the Texas system the Republican Party has and the Michigan system that the Democratic Party has, and the front loading and the back loading of all that stuff. I mean, it's simply amazing to elect a president in that way. The districting thing, I agree, is a travesty. The only way, and I really don't have much faith in technology to make that a heck of a lot better. The answer in this respect is certainly proportional representation, where you have much larger districts represented by multiple members. There's not the need to then carve up particular voting constituencies in that way, and you can then fairly represent different political parties. I'm afraid that if we're going to move on this front, federalism stands as a barrier to us. I think the voting process needs to be nationalized. The voting procedures need to be nationalized so that how one votes in Georgia is the same way as how one is able to vote in Illinois. I'm not sure what the problem is there. I know I can take my ATM card and stick it into a machine in San Francisco, and it draws money out of my account here in Chicago, and it always seems to work. I know that we can sit down at our computer and move money from one account to another, and from one account to some company we owe money to, and it seems to work pretty well. I'm not sure why voting can't work with that same ease. And I guess, you know, the conspiratorial part of me, it's a small part that exists, suggests that part of the design is to make it difficult for people to participate, rather than to make it easier for people to participate. You know, I will have to give my lectures in the fall on the electoral college and try to explain to students that the total number of votes that the candidate gets is not important. It's how many electoral votes they get, and why it is that the French are able to seem to elect a president without having to bother with that process, by having one election which everybody participates in a runoff. And one could have an instantaneous runoff as well, and not have to bother with figuring. And, you know, I for one am tired of having to wait to have a presidential election turn on Ohio and Florida. Every single election, you have to worry about just those two states. We have a much better presidential election process if the Electoral College was put aside. Our Federalist friends might say that's a terrible thing because the Constitution would diminish some of the control that the states have, but I'm not sure what is gained by this particular process, beyond which, of course, it provides an extraordinary advantage to small states if one calculates does the actual calculations here. The vote for the president in Wyoming counts a great deal more than the vote for the president here in Illinois. So those are the types of reforms that I'm particularly interested in seeing, that would make our system, I think, a good deal more democratic. Other things I'll move on to.
I'll try not to touch on anything that was mentioned by others that I might have addressed. One thing with regard to our democratic procedures that's a major problem today, particularly on the national level, as many of you are aware, is procedural issues, particularly in the United States Senate. I don't really have a problem if there is a body that's going to have a 3/5 vote to pass like new legislation, if that's a system we want the way of protecting minority interests. But we know there are situations now where, for example, 1 or 2 senators can put holds on various things like judicial nominations, etc. Small groups are able to delay things through procedural things. I think that is a flaw in our current democratic procedures. It might be Congress has changed its procedures through time, and hopefully it will to address that. But if not, that may be something where a constitutional amendment might be needed in the future to avoid that kind of situation. With regard to presidential elections, I do agree that a direct election would be the best, but I do want to just make a add-on. There is an option for states to have individual their electors voted by, where each candidate who wins each congressional district gets one electoral vote, and then just 2 go to the winner of the whole state. Maine and Nebraska currently have that procedure. If we couldn't get a constitutional amendment, if a broad number of states that were kind of politically diverse were to go in that direction, that would be make it a little more where you're getting more equal votes, because the current system obviously makes a vote in certain key battleground states much more valuable than other states. And so it's not, one man, one vote, because this vote here is worth 10 times another one somewhere else. So that is why something that makes a change electoral system for the president